Hi there, and welcome to Flip the Script Season 1, Episode 15, 7 sequences that nobody is thinking about, but you totally should be. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you go to flipthescript.co to download the deck so you can follow along. Without further ado, let's jump into the content. So let's talk about some sequences, y'all. 3 pieces to the agenda. First, I want to start with the most common sequences. So we kind of have a baseline of sequences that most people are deploying and using within their organization. Second piece, we can go into sequences that nobody is using. And then third, I want to give you a comprehensive book of sequences. So basically the summary of 1 and 2 so that you have it as just one downloadable slide. For this session, make sure that you download the deck because I'm going to go pretty meaty and I think you'll probably want to have it in front of you. So first, let's start with the most common sequences. As far as the most common sequences, there are going to be 3 that I see at every organization, or most organizations who have these different efforts going on. But the number 1 evergreen sequence that I usually hear people mention, other than cold outbound, is going to be content downloads. So this is typically, an organization will put out ebooks, they'll put out resources, they'll put out different pieces of information that they want people to read. And people who download them, they are usually piped through in an automated fashion, hypothetically, to a sequence where they're either inbound BDR or SDR is calling on them. Number 2 is going to be webinar registrants. So this is anyone who's attending some kind of webinar. Maybe you do, let's say you're within sales tech and you do some kind of, let's use Ambition, for instance. They're a great coaching and KPI platform. They typically do some kind of webinars on different coaching pieces or how to coach your reps or keep them accountable, within something like a pandemic during COVID. But anyone who would attend that webinar, you can pipe through into a sequence into a sequence that your reps can then follow up on. So this is the second most commonly used sequence that I see other than cold outbound. And then number 3 is going to be event attendees. So virtual for now, but event attendees is a very common sequence that I see follow-up for. So I've attended a virtual event recently and I registered for it. And then all of a sudden I got a bunch of different sequence emails from SDRs who were following up because I downloaded or I was a part of that virtual event. So those are the 3 that I see most commonly. But now, let's talk about the fun ones that no one is using, or typically I don't see used within an organization that can really help you drive pipeline. So I've deployed each one of these sequences, especially my most current organization, and they worked wonders for me. So just kind of a quick ad hoc story. Whenever I came back and I was working with a team and COVID hit, I thought, okay, I have all these sequences ready to deploy. And we were at quota, but I thought, okay, these sequences are going to take us to the next level. They're probably going to 2x us or 3x us from where we're currently at. COVID hit, unfortunately, and a lot of our outbound funnel went out the door, right? People were rolling back budgets, people were doing layoffs, etc. And I had a new CEO at the time who was entering into the organization, and then a new CRO who came in. So, of course, wanting to be the A+ student or whatever, I wanted to really bridge the gap and say hey, I have a new person internally, and so I want to impress them. And so thankfully, I had these sequences ready to deploy because when I did deploy them and my outbound funnel emptied out, it actually gave us the best month in April that we had ever had as an organization because of these sequences. The best month again in May, the best month in June again, and the best month in July again. So we did 4 months back to back in a row where we had the best month that our organization had ever had, and during one of the biggest pandemics, certainly during my lifetime, that was happening. And so at a really impactful time to the economy and a really impactful time to most sales teams, this actually helped guide us through and help us get the numbers that we need. So let's jump into them. Here are 3 sequences, and I want you to pay attention to the title here of 3 sequences to not mention the why. Not mention the why when you're using them within your sequence in your outbound. So let's start with the top. So the number one sequence that I wouldn't mention the premise as to why, and basically just personalize to that person, but use this sequence as a way to know that these people probably, are more lucrative to you or have higher buyer intent, or it might be easier to book a meeting with them. But number one is what I would call dark funnel leads. So what is dark funnel? Dark funnel is going to be anyone who is really researching your company, but hasn't become a hand raiser yet. Thanks to the internet, and Forrester published a report on all the things that you consider before you actually request a demo or you get into the sales cycle with someone. But people are doing more research than ever before on your product because they basically want to source all of this information before they talk to a salesperson. So back in the day, they had to talk to a salesperson because they needed them to understand product, needed them to understand a demo, or needed them to understand like, okay, this is what this person sells. But because the internet, is obviously like we use it so often, we use it for everything, people can do more research than ever before. So you'll find them researching a bunch of different things. Again, Forrester published a report and they will call their peers. They'll look at G2 reviews or like anyone, any kind of third-party reviews on the software, people who've used the software, or they'll talk to industry leaders or influencers and see like what software they recommend. But basically, your buyer nowadays wants to sit in the comfort of their own bed in their sweatpants and understand what your product does. So a couple of different sites that can help you capture this dark funnel, as we would call it, of like basically the part of your funnel that you don't even know exists. Is going to be G2 for buyer intent. So G2 is a source and a database for software review. So if I go to G2, if I want to know what Ambition does, for instance, and how their users are talking about them, I can go to G2 and I can look at any kind of reviews of people who are current Ambition users. So I can see, a myriad of different things, what they're saying about the software, what market it fits in with the best, if there are any issues, if there are any problems. So just think about, when you're buying a pair of shoes at Nordstrom, for instance, you want to check the reviews and see what people are saying. So whenever you do that research, G2 can pipe through to you what companies are doing research on you and what companies are doing research on your competitors. So you can understand they're probably in market if they are or if they are researching one of my competitors. 6 Sense and Bombor are two other providers, and this is basically, I'm not too clear on the specifics, but I think, but from my understanding, it's when they are searching on Google or some kind of search engine that basically this can surface, a bunch of different users that are a part of a dark funnel too. So all three are really great sources where you can, source these people whenever they're in the dark funnel. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to book them because they're already looking. The second sequence that I use where I wouldn't mention the premise, number one, I wouldn't, in the first case scenario with dark funnel, I wouldn't mention the premise because it might come off a little creepy. If you're going to, I would classic roll diffuse and say not to be super creepy right off the bat. But number two that I wouldn't mention the premise for is company funding. So company funding, you can use Crunchbase to source this information, DataFox or LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I would recommend Crunchbase. I think they are an amazing platform, an amazing company. But they can basically give you a short query list of all the companies that are that just raised company funding. So even though this is a super important metric to you, full disclosure, you need to realize as an asterisk mark that it's not necessarily super important to the person that you're calling into. So just because someone is super lucrative to you doesn't mean you're lucrative to them, TLDR. So this is a great sequence to run, but when people raise money, the theory goes that they're looking for, people in tech is usually what they're looking to do to expand. So this might be a good time to enter into the organization and see if they are interested in buying some of your software because they just raised the money for it. So again, I would personalize to the prospect and be very, very careful about that. But this is a great sequence to trigger. And then the last one on this slide where I wouldn't mention the premise because it's can come off a little bit creepy. If you do, then you need a classic roll diffuse and call it out, not to be super creepy, but looks like X. But the third sequence is website views. So Leadfeeder and Clearbit are two great sources for this. But if people are coming to your website, there is a way to track it. and you can pipe through a lot of these leads into a sequence. And so it's more likely to, hypothetically, if someone's coming to your website, it's easier to sell into them because they already know who you are. So you don't have to do any of the typical discovery or typical education process of what your product is and how you work, because they already have heard of it from somewhere because they're ending up on your website. So now let's talk about 4 sequences where you can mention the premise. Number 4, let's talk about executive churn. Executive churn is actually one of my favorite sequences because it's something that I had heard constantly from account executives of like, hey, what if I have someone who is using outreach and then they churn to a company, that wasn't using outreach, and I want to sell into them because it's much easier. They already know my value prop. If you have a great user experience with them or user journey with them, then they really, really like outreach. So it's much easier to sell into them because they've already used your tool. So I had always heard about this from account executives, but I didn't know that it was scalable until I met User Gems. Really, really great team, Christian and Trinity over there. I would reach out to them, but User Gems is a tool where you can basically understand if someone who used your product churned to another company that's within ICP or ICC, Ideal Customer Profile or Company, that you can sell into them in an automated fashion. So this is a great initiative, but I didn't know if it was repeatable and scalable other than you just randomly noticing until I met User Gems. So User Gems can surface to you your buyers who have used your product before and then went to another company that you want to sell into. So it's much, much easier and kind of a low-hanging fruit. The 5th sequence is common VCs. This is another one that I had heard from account executives as an angle to go, but didn't know it was really scalable until I worked with Crunchbase on this one. So common VCs is if I, let's say, have a flip the script hypothetically, had Bessemer Venture Partners, investing in this company, which is not true, by the way. But let's say Bessemer invested in Flip the Script. And Bessemer also invests in Structure and PagerDuty, and I wanted to sell into them. That might be a really common tie because we have a common venture capitalist firm between the two of us. So a common VC sequence can be really, really lucrative in terms of if they're in the same portfolio, typically the same kind of people. So Byron Dieter, for instance, is over at Bessemer. Shout out Byron if you're watching this, probably aren't. But really writes really fire content, incredible career journey if you want to check out his career. But he, probably knows a lot of the people at PagerDuty and Structure, I would imagine, Twilio, because he has invested in all of those companies in ServiceTitan. So common VC sequence would be, you have share a common VC. So it's reasonable to say that there is kind of like a soft, warm intro there because you both know Byron. The 6th sequence is firmographic trigger for IPO. So companies who IPO usually are looking to do a little bit of consolidation and then a lot of expanding, right? So it's a super exciting time for a company. So when companies go public, and they go to the stock exchange, there is a way that you can automate this and you can understand who are all the companies that IPO, if that's a really great trigger for you of a time that you want to sell into people using Crunchbase. I know I mentioned Crunchbase a lot, but this is a great way to basically segment down to all of the companies that IPO'd, within the last 6 months, or you can actually do it in real time within your CRM. So they have a new feature that basically can trigger in your CRM whenever a company does IPO. So you can make it super automated and fast and easy for your SDRs to say like, okay, I'm going to call on all the companies that just had the exciting announcement of going public, and I can do it in an automated fashion. And then LinkedIn engagement. This one is very, very valuable, LinkedIn engagement, but is the slowest. So if let's say I made a post on LinkedIn and, got 100 comments, and my SDRs wanted to call into these people because they were trailing in the comments. So it makes it a little bit easier because it's a warm intro. It's a really, really great way to do it, but because of the nature of LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a place for us to collaborate and understand each other's businesses, hypothetically not to sell into one another. And because of that premise, There is lots of valuable information, but it's kind of hard to structure and to monetize and to do in an automated fashion. So LinkedIn, the best way to do it from what I've done in the past is basically, you have an SDR that can download a list of all the people who made comments, and then you have to go through and trim out all of the companies that don't hit profile, all the companies you're already sold into, and all the titles that don't hit profile, and then you can round robin them to your team. So kind of a little bit of work in there, but this has been a great source of meetings for us in the past, for teams I've worked with in the past. So a little bit of time, you got to bleed a little bit on the front end, but a lot of people who are willing to book meetings because they're engaging with you and your content on LinkedIn. Surprise lightning round. No, she didn't. Sequence 8 and 9. I'm not just going to do 7. So sequence number 8 that I use is people who've opened your emails. There's a really great way to do this through outreach if you use them as a sales engagement partner. But basically, people who are opening your emails, you can trigger an automatic task that if I sent, Byron Dieter a email, he opens the email, then it can trigger a task in outreach of like, okay, I'm going to call Byron right away. So I typically do a sequence that is 2 calls that day and 2 calls the next day. So if Byron opens my email, I call him right away. I don't mention it. I don't say like, hey, I noticed you opened my email. Don't be too creepy to Byron. But you want to say like, hey, Byron, I was giving you a call because I just read your article on the top 10 rules of cloud infrastructure. One line that stood out to me was X, and I was curious to know if you've come across outreach before. So email opens is a really good sequence because your buyers are bringing up your emails. So they kind of see it as the right place, right time. And they're like, wow, I was just reading your email and that's kind of creepy. Sequence 9 is that you can mention for context is demoed in the past. This is a great low-hanging fruit for people who have, let's say they inbounded. I work with Twilio. They inbounded and they requested a demo. They went through a demo either on inbound or on outbound. And then for whatever reason, they decided not to move forward in the process. Maybe it was bad timing or they pulled budgets or et cetera. But you can really be intentional about sequencing these people again based on the right premise. I put a tip here of careful in the sequencing that you have an opt-out. And usually I would recommend including some level of personalization as to why they didn't move forward. So using a software like Chorus, you can surface within the demo. Maybe they said like, hey, this just isn't the right time because we just brought on board a new VP of sales, but give me a call back in 2 months. So this is a good way to put them into a sequence, but I would also include some level of personalization about them demoing in the past and what they said is the reasoning so that it makes your prospect feel like you know a little bit more about the user journey and you're not just calling them out of the blue. So that's going to be it. Just kidding. Double lightning round. Yeah, I have no life. So sequence 10. Sequence 10. High value MQL. This is a great sequence. I wouldn't mention the premise. I put that above. But high value MQL is going to be if your prospect MQLs, it means that they became a marketing qualified lead. This can happen for several different reasons, dependent on how you're lead scoring. But basically, someone becomes an MQL based on they downloaded content, they attended a webinar, etc. You already have those in the sequences. But there are instances where they open enough of your emails or they come to your website enough to where one action didn't trigger it, but enough of these actions made them a high value MQL. So I put up here at the top that you should use classic rule diffusion, where you basically say, not to be the over aggressive SDR or not to be, not to be super creepy right off the bat, but it looks like you came to the website recently. So always be assumptive that they did it because, there are some flaws in tech and sometimes you don't know, maybe they didn't come to your website. So I would always classic rule diffuse by saying like, not to be the over aggressive SDR where you negatively call out what someone hypothetically does in that role or typically does in that role, not to be an over aggressive SDR, but it looks like you came to the website a couple of times. But more importantly, I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you talk about scaling teams effectively. So you always want to transition and go into, something that's about them from a psychographic premise, something that they did, wrote, engaged with, etc. Another session for another time, but you get the point. And then the last sequence, I promise, sequence 11, is common VCs with your customers. So common VCs with your customers. So we did common VC earlier of I'm with Flip the Script. We have Bessemer Venture Partners that are investing in me. And so I want to reach out to PagerDuty because we share that common VC. Common VC with your customer is, let's say I'm at Flip the Script and I sold into PagerDuty. And PagerDuty shares Bessemer Venture Partners as a common VC with Instructure. And Instructure I'm trying to sell into. So it sounds like a super weak angle. And I actually was not so belief heavy in this sequence. So I said, okay, I'm going to deploy this and see if it works. And it worked insatiably well. So again, that's if you have a customer that shares a common VC with, that shares a common VC with someone that you want to sell into. You want to mention it for context and you want to transition with, but more importantly, and talk about your prospect. So great way to do this is by downloading a list of VCs for, you guessed it, my best friend's Crunchbase, and then feeding it into the sequence from there. So that is it for the 7, and by 7 I mean 11 sequences. So I wanted to quickly give you a list of the comprehensive book of sequences that I am using. On the left-hand side for bucket number 1, you should mention the premise and then transition with, but more importantly, and give a personalization summary. So what that looked like is this. Hi, Ralph, I noticed that you downloaded our content on selling to the C-suite, but more importantly, I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you talk about scaling teams effectively. Bucket number 2, I wouldn't mention the premise. So I would just surface them that they are a high value lead to me. So what that looked like is this. I would mention a personalization summary and then one line in specific. So, hi, Ralph, I noticed that you wrote this. Reason for my outreach is I noticed you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you talk about scaling teams effectively. One line that stood out to me was it all comes down to great conversation. So I was curious to know if you've come across outreach before. So one bucket, you're mentioning the premise, transitioning with, but more importantly, and talking about a personalization summary. And bucket number 2, you're giving the personalization summary and giving one line in specific, but not mentioning the premise of the sequence. The sequences that are highlighted in blue come from marketing, and the rest are really scenarios that you're doing on cold outbound that aren't an effort for marketing. So in summary, structure is really, really tough. And putting the rules and ambit of direction around how you can iron out your playbook is a feat. However, if you invest the time and you invest the energy and you really make it an effort to, structure the timing, structure the sequences, structure the premises, scenarios, etc. for your SDRs, and alleviate all of that automation and alleviate all of that list building and list cleaning work for them, that is 70% of the value or of the battle for them. And you alleviate all of that brain work that they spend there. And you take those calories and you put it on the creativity for the outreach, you will be astonished at the results you will see. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you should do all of these all at once, but the more of these sequences that you can include, the more I have again in my experience seen in terms of the results and the outcome that you see on the back end. So I think it's a step-by-step process, but I'm excited to see everyone put their toe in the water. So that's everything, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this session and didn't get quite enough of me, go to flipthescript.co and there's a bunch of different videos on different sales topics. And if you really like this video, go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, tag us in your top 2 takeaways from this session so I know what you liked. Either way, hope you have a great rest of your day.